The animation template is going to provide you with an example of how you can animate inside of Unity. We're going to be using the built-in timeline, and if you're familiar with any video editing software or 2D animation like After Effects, this should feel pretty familiar. I am going to recreate this basic animation, but this should be enough to give you basic knowledge of how the timeline and the animation timeline work together. And they should allow you to make even more complex animations. And as you can see, we are also animating the color of these objects. This is only an introduction, but we are going to go through a lot of things. I'm going to delete everything and we're going to start from scratch. So instead of calling this a template, it will be more of an example, and this video would just be a showcase tutorial. Okay, let's start from zero. One thing I do want to add that I didn't add on the previous example is the head mesh. I'm going to go into the simulator and wait until it resets and then stop it about there. I'm going to import the head mesh and just drag it underneath the vertices so it is a child of the face tracker, and it should be right about the same position as our face mesh. So maybe all I have to do is rotate it 180 on the Y and maybe move it back on the Z just a bit. We're going to add a transparent material just so whenever our shapes are rotating around the head that we can occlude them and we cannot see them, for example, through the eyes or something like that, just to make sure that they are invisible. But for now, I don't need it, so I'm just going to deactivate it. The first thing I want to do is create an empty object, and this is just going to allow us to create a pivot point where all of our objects are going to use to rotate. I need to make sure that it's a child of the face tracker, and I'm just going to drag it underneath the head mesh. I'm also just going to copy all the position information from the head mesh onto our new empty object. Grab the rotation as well. We can do copy Euler angles, rotation, paste. I am also going to use a custom mesh instead of the default cubes this time. So I'm going to go into the assets folder, cube animations, and I'm going to use this Filta earring model and make it a child of the game object. I'm going to offset it a bit to the front, maybe somewhere in there. And I also want to increase the scale to something like 2. So I can either go to each individual axis, change it to 2, or I can enable the constraints proportions. That one should be enabled, that is disabled. So if I only change one parameter, let's change it to 5, it's going to change all of them. Let's go back to 2. Okay, and because our earring model is a child of the game object, and as you can tell, the pivot points are different. We can rotate the parent. I'm going to press the letter E, and then we can see that that is what's going to give it the rotation. We can also just rotate it individually, and we can do that as well later. But for now, I just wanted to rotate around the head, so I am going to animate the parent. I'm going to enable the head mesh once again, just so we can check that our rotation, that our object is not rotating and colliding with the head mesh. So let me select the parent, rotate it to check, and yeah, it's not colliding. We should be good. And before we continue, if you don't have this game tab docked to the right, you might find it here next to the scene object, so you can toggle between those. But just to make it a bit easier and to have something to visualize, just drag it and dock it to the right. Okay, let's set back the rotation to 180 degrees. And I just want to rename this parent something like, I'm going to press F2. You can also rename it from here, or you can click and then click again. And then let's do something like object 1. And to start animating, let's go into Window, Animation, Animation, or you can press Ctrl+6. And let's just dock this animation window maybe here to the right of the project. With the object 1 selected, let's go ahead and create a new animation clip. In this one, I'm going to name origin rotation because that is what's going to do. The first thing I want to do before keyframing anything is to change the timeline settings to what I want it to be. So right now we can go on the menu here on the timeline and we can see that it is set to frames, but you can change it to seconds. It's depending on what you like. And going back to the menu, you can set the sample rate over here, but you can also set it over here where it says samples. For this example, let's do 30. And to zoom out on this timeline on the Windows, I'm going to press Alt and then scroll wheel to just zoom out and see a bit more of it. But let's add our first keyframe so we can set the total duration of this animation. With my object 1 selected, I'm going to click on add property. Let's go into the transform, open up that menu, and let's select rotation. By default, it's going to keyframe on 0 frames and on 30. But let's say that I want to keyframe all the way, I don't know, something like 12 seconds. So if I click on the timeline, you're going to see that this number represents where you are on the timeline. So let's say I want to do something like 30 times 12. That's the number of frames and times the number of seconds that I want. And it's very handy that you can do math inside of this box. So 30 times 12, I press enter, it's going to give me 360. And then I'm just going to click on add a keyframe. As you can see, it made our timeline way bigger, so now it can fit that 360 keyframe. Let's delete the key at 30. And at frame 360, let's open up the rotation. And on the Y, let's change that to something. I wanted to do a full rotation. So again, I can do calculations inside of this box. So I wanted to do a full rotation. So let's add 360. If I go back to the beginning and then play it, we're going to see it rotate. I do want it to rotate counterclockwise, so let's go back to frame 360. Let's set this back to 180, and instead of adding 360, let's subtract 360. Let's play that again. And yes, this is the direction that I want for this animation. Okay, so we have our animation, but I do want it to loop infinitely. And if you notice, when we go to the beginning, it starts slow, and if we go towards the end, it's gonna end slow. And this is because of the default interpolation of the curves. So we can select our object rotation, go into the curves. Right now we cannot see it, but just like in the viewport, just click anywhere here in the timeline and then press the letter F. That's going to fit everything to the window. And here you can see that we have an ease in and then an ease out. I'm going to select my first keyframe and then shift the last keyframe, right click and then both tangents and then just click on linear. That way it's just going to keep a constant speed of the rotation throughout the whole animation. Let's play it again. And as you can see, now we don't have that slow in or the slow out. So now when it loops, there's no like stop or anything. I want to add 5 more of these, and we're going to be using the timeline, but I also want to show you how you can reuse this animation clip that we just created. So again, with the object 1 selected, let's go to Window, Sequencing, Timeline. I also want to dock this maybe to the right of the animation, and then let's click on Create. For this one, I'll name it Main Timeline. And before we start, go to the Playable Director component from the Object 1 selected. And for the wrap mode, let's just set it to loop. Otherwise, it's only going to play what we have selected on the timeline. And once that is done, it's just going to stop. Okay, let's go back to frame 0. You can either click on the plus or right click here on this empty space. Let's add an animation track. And in here, I want to drag my object 1 into it. If it shows a yellow triangle, it means that the component is disabled. And to fix this, go into the animation tab and just make sure to deselect this preview box. If you go back in the timeline, you see that now the icon changes. And on this animation track, let's open up the menu and let's add from animation clip. And as you can see, here's the origin rotation animation that we just created. So let's just double click that. Now, if you notice, this is running all the way to 720 frames. That is because we also have to change the frame rate from the timeline. So let's go into the cog, let's go into the settings. It is set to frames as well. You can set it to time code or seconds. Let's go into the frame rate and let's set this to 30 frames per second. Now, if I play my animation, you're going to see that it's actually starting the opposite way. So all I have to do is click on the origin rotation clip and deactivate remove start offset. So once we go back to 0, it starts wherever we set the animation to start, right on the front. Now it's time to add 5 more of these objects. So I'm simply going to select object 1 and then press Ctrl plus D on Windows. Let's go back and select object 1 and let's right click and add another animation track. Let's drag object 2 into this new animation track. Select the origin rotation, Ctrl C, select the object 2 animation track, Ctrl V. And with the clip selected, let's actually use those offsets to have them in different positions. Let's go into the rotation And I want to change this to 60 on the Y. So now if we play the animation, they're going to be offset in their rotation and their position, but they're still going to use the same animation clip, so they're both going to have a full 360 rotation. And I want to do this 4 more times. So let me go into Object 2 and just get started. Control D to duplicate. Let me change it to Object 3. Control D to duplicate that. Object 4. Control D. 5. Control D. And 6. Now back to Object 1, select it, right click, animation track, another one, and let me just make this window a bit larger, and the last one. Let's drag them down in order. Object 3, Object 4, 5, and 6. Again, I can go to 3, and I already have it copied, so I can just paste it. Let's go to 4, paste, 5, paste, 6, paste. Now clip number 2 is already offset 60 degrees. Let's offset the other ones 60 degrees from each other. Let's go into 3 and let's do 120. Let's go to 4. Let's do 180. Let's go to 5. Let's do 240. Let's go to 6 and let's do 300. Again, if we play it, the animations are going to be the same. They're just being offsetted by its rotations, and they're just going to loop again. Let's check. Yep, they're just looping. Once again, all of these are having the same origin, rotation, animation clip, but let's say that I want to animate them individually. I can still do that. I just have to create its own animation clip. Let's go into my Object 1, go into the animation. Let's open this menu where it says origin, rotation, and let's create a new clip. I want to name this local rotation 1. And I am going to have to set up the timeline again. So, I mean, it's no biggie. Let's just do 30 frames. We know it was 360. And now the important part, when I go into property, instead of using this first transform that we see, that is the transform of the origin. But I want them to rotate, like we named the animation local rotation, because I want these filter logos to rotate on its own axis. If I go under the filter earring, this is where we're going to find their transform. So let's open this up and let's add this rotation. We are on the frame 360, but we cannot see it. I'm simply going to keyframe it. You're going to see the timeline expand, and you can use this to make it bigger all the way. But another trick I want to show you is just click on the timeline, press the letter F, just like you did with the curves, and it's going to fit everything you have keyframed into this viewable window. Going to delete the default 30 key. And for this example, let's go to frame 180. Let's open up the rotation and let's do something like 60 on each axis. If you're scrolling and you see no change, go back into the timeline and just again deactivate this preview. For some reason, you cannot preview the animation and the timeline at the same time, so just make sure that one of them is deactivated. Let's go back into the animation and then we can see that it is being animated. Okay, now I can save this, deactivate the preview. Let's go into the timeline. And in order to add to the animation clip that we already have, let's go, for example, into the Object 1 animation track, and you can add what is called an override track. This is not going to take over the animation, but just be more of an addition to the original animation. It works pretty much the same way. I can go into the menu, add clip from animation clip, and let me select the local rotation. So now if I play it, you're going to see that this is our Object 1. You're going to see that one rotate. And there it is, coming back to its place. I want this to alternate on every other object, so let me do it on 3 and on 5. Let's go to 3, add override track. Let me make sure that I am on 0, and I can actually just click on local rotation for the object number 1, copy. Let's go to this one, and paste. Let's go into 5, add override track, make sure that we have it selected, and then paste. So now if we play it, every other one is going to have that offset rotation. Okay, let's do that one more time, and now let's add a bit of scale, maybe on the ones that don't have any rotation animation. Let me go into Object 2 this time, disable the preview on the timeline, and let's go and create a new animation clip. Let's do local scale for this one. Again, we have to reset the settings. This is 30. This is 360. And again, when we add the property, make sure that it is the object and not the origin transform. Let's open this up, open up the transform, and open up the scale. Let's get that keyframe on 360. Click on here, anywhere on the space, press F so it fits everything, it focuses everything on the window. Let's delete 30. And whenever I'm dealing with scale, if I do want it to be uniform, I can actually select the earring itself. And just like the beginning, I can scale it from here because we do have this constraint proportions enabled. And there is not really an option down here in the animation. So I would just recommend to do it up here in the inspector. This time, let's go into keyframe, I don't know, 120. Let's have them go to 3. Let's keyframe. Then let's go to frame 240. Let's take them down to 1. Keyframe again. Deselect preview. Let's go to timeline. And we're going to add these to object 2, 4, and 6. But before that, I want to show you that you can actually stack the override animations. If I want to add this to object 1, I can select the track and go to its menu, and I can add an override track. You're not going to find it on the override track itself. It has to be from the animation track. And if I want to add this new scale animation, again, click on the menu, add animation from clip, and I want to select local scale. Now, as you can see, it added the animation wherever the timeline marker was. So that's why I make sure that I am on 0. I mean, I can still drag it in, but it is something that is going to save you, I don't know, 1 or 2 seconds, but it does gonna add up. So that's just a quick trick. Make sure that you are on 0 because it is gonna add it. I mean, this might work if you want to add it at a specific spot, but in my case, I want to add it to 0. So let's make sure that it is on 0. And as you can see, it is going to increase the scale of that first one because they are stacking on top of each other. The timeline is a very powerful tool, so now you can see how complex your animations can get. Okay, let's delete this override. And just to create some space, let me close down the menu of the ones that already have an override. So I need object 2, override track, object 4, override track, scroll down, object 6, override track. This time I can start from the bottom. Let's go into override 0, add an animation clip, local scale. With the clip selected, Control C on the Windows. Let's go into the object 4, override, paste, object 2, override, paste. You can see how everything is coming along. Okay, so that is everything you need to animate the PSR, the position, scale, and rotation of your objects. And to finalize this tutorial, I also want to show you how you can keyframe something like the color of the material and a lot more other parameters. Let me go into my projects. Under the cube animation, I mean now they're not cubes, they're filter logos. So let me just go ahead and create 3 different materials. Let's go into material. Let's rename it to M underscore object 1. Let me duplicate this 2 times. One of them's supposed to be object 2, and then just object. For object 1, let's just make this one a quick just red. Object 2, I just want to make this one green, and blue for the third one. And let's just assign these materials for the filter earring. In object 1, let's do this red one. Second one, let's do green. Third one, blue. Fourth, red. Number 5, green. And then blue on the 6th one. Go back to object 1, timeline. And again, to show you that we can stack the overrides, let's create a specific animation just to change the colors. Let's go to the animation tab and create a new animation clip. If you color change 1. And for this one, we're going to add a property under the filter earring because this is where the material is assigned. And then it's going to be under the mesh renderer. Here you can see all of the parameters from the material. We want to change the base color, so let's add a base color. Let's open this up, and here you can see that we have access to the RGB and the alpha. Let me set up this timeline again, 30 frames at 160. Let's keyframe it, focus. And what I like to do is select my filter earring. Let's open up the material. Let's go to the frame that we want to animate, 180. And from here, I want to change it to its opposite. So its complementary will be, in this case, cyan. Let's select that. If you want to be more precise, and if you know the numbers off the top of your head, you know that everything should be all the way at the top, but the red. But also what I want to do right now, this wheel is set up to 0.55 for the traditional RGB, and the parameter is set to only 0 to 1. Now we can actually change this to RGB 0 to 1. And to have the opposite red, I can set up the red to be 0, 0. Let's set up the blue to 1 as well. And then let's just keyframe it. Let's go into the timeline again, object 1. It is disabled. Go into the animation, make sure that it's deselected. And the object that have the red materials are the object number 1. So let's add a override track for that one from animation clip. Color change. Make sure to scroll in this area. If you scroll down here, it's going to increase it. So make sure to scroll over here if I want to move down and get a little bit more of space. So override 1, menu, animation clip, color change. So now when I play this, the red is going to switch to cyan and then go back to red. Okay, let me do the same for the last two materials, and I'm just gonna go and you can follow along or just skip. Object 2, deactivate the preview, animation. Let's create a new clip. It will be color change, number 2. Property, filter earring, mesh renderer, base color. The timeline to 30 samples, 360 frames, keyframe it, focus, delete. Let me go to frame 180, 0, red 1, blue 1. You can see it up here in the game view. Green to magenta. Minimize the menus of the other ones already used. Object 2, add override track. Let's add an animation clip. Color change. Here you can see the names. Color change 2. And I think number 5 has to be done as well. Nope, it has to be an override track. Add animation, color change 2. So now we play it. All the green ones should be changing to magenta. There we go. Let's go to object 3, save with a preview, go to animation, create a new, and the last animation, color change will be 3, save it, samples to 30, property, filter earring, mesh render, base color. Let's go to 360, make a keyframe, click anywhere in here, F to focus. Let's delete the frames, keyframes on 30. Let's go to 180. Nothing on the blue, everything on the green, everything on the red. Let's save it, and now let's finally just assign it. And this one should be for object 3. Color change 3. And for object 6. Color change 3. Okay, so after final testing, you do have to make sure that every object, remember how everyone has a different timeline? Like if you change it, make sure that every object has the same hierarchy. So my object 1 has object 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make sure that it is the same for 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Otherwise, whenever you upload it to the app, it's not going to be reading it. It was only showing one of them rotating, so that's what it was showing. But this is going to fix that problem. Other than that, I hope this tutorial was useful to you. There was a lot of things that we covered, but this should give you a good understanding and a good base on how far you can take this animation thanks to the timeline and thanks to the animation tracks. Another advantage is that you don't have to leave Unity in order to animate your objects. And finally, remember that you can keyframe pretty much anything that you have access to in the inspector. Not only the position, scale, and rotation, as you can see we did it with the color, but there are way more other things that you can keyframe and animate.